I'm delighted that our next speaker in the Evolutionary Origins of Speech Acts conference here at the University of Bucharest in a hybrid mode is Dr. Krisztina Orbán. Krisztina, it is wonderful seeing you again, and quite a pleasure to be able to hear your talk titled Communicative Action, Sense, and Reference. Thanks again, and please take it away.
Thanks very much. I will speak about the evolution of meaning in terms of sense and reference. For this, I need a bit of setup. So following Mitch, a cue is any feature of an entity that conveys information, including misinformation. So when I say I am here now, then my location, which would typically a cue about where I am, would be just a cue and not the content of the sentence. It's not in the meaning of the sentence, a mere cue. A signal is any cue that was designed for its ability to convey the information, okay? So a signal is a subset of cues. A communicative act is a voluntary production of a signal with a communicative purpose. And it's very important that a communicative act is actually a precursor of speech act. So I think it's very hard to put speech act down, but when we have a voluntary production of a signal, then I think we can call that communicative act. And I think probably that's the locution to start to understand speech act. So Green and many others argues for continuity in the evolution of meaning, which means no gap between non-linguistic and flexible linguistic communication, of course, against Chomsky and others. So what I will discuss is the continuity. When we think about continuity, we have to think about in terms of which dimension we do have continuity. So we can have recursion, modularity, hierarchical structure. We have too many options. I want to offer that it is possible to look at it by choosing a candidate dimension, which is a single feature. And I suggest that this dimension is decoupling. I suggest that decoupling the signal from the signified is a good way to look at the evolution of meaning. But I will elaborate that thought because decoupling will come in two forms, namely in terms of meaning and in terms of reference. But first, decoupling is something which Dennett and everyone always says, but it's never said exactly what is decoupling. So first of all, I have to say what is decoupling. So you imagine a communicative action, it has a meaning, and the meaning is somehow related to a state of affair which makes it successful or correct. So you think about an alarm call, eagle alarm call of vervet monkey. So the vervet monkey evil alarm call is the communicative action. It's a kind. We have the meaning. It's construed very, very broadly. So it's like eagle approaching from the sky, danger or something like that. It's a very broad construction. And after we have a state of affair, that exact things which is happening in the world for which the alarm call is uttered. So what we have a communicative act, we have a meaning, and we have a state of affair. And we imagine that there is a 1-1-1 relation. So whenever there is something like decoupling, then that 1-1-1 relation will be different. So for example, first I show with language how it works, and after I show with other cases. So for example, when I say Bob, then Bob can be used even when Bob is not there. So I can say Bob was here. That means that the Bob, the proper name is decoupled from its referent, okay? So you remember I had the state of affair in the end. So here it's just a name, but doesn't matter. So the referent need not be there. When we speak about alarm calls or when we speak about animal communication, we always speak about a holistic signal. So there is a signal and the signal has a holistic meaning. Okay, so first of all, when I say Bob, then Bob need not be there. I can use Bob without Bob being there, so it's decoupled. When I point to Bob, then Bob has to be there. So pointing to Bob is not decoupled from Bob. What we do, so what we gain with using decoupling, because we need decoupling for getting from somehow a natural meaning to a non-natural meaning. What we gain is an increase in expressivity. So how we do that? So decoupling of communicative action from its meaning or referent can come in many, many, many forms. You remember from the one-one-one relation, we go to one-to-many relation in some way. So one communicative action originally have a meaning and has a state of affair. But if we have the same kind of communicative action, but we have two meanings, then we can say it is decoupled from its original meaning. Counterfactual thinking is the same, because the state of affair mustn't obtain when we have a counterfactual thinking. You remember there is the communicative act, the meaning, and the state of affair. And the one-one-one relation has to break up to one-to-many relation. A communicative action used for a new signal would be again a form of decoupling. If I look at my turtle and say, Cicero is charging, you will understand I use Cicero for the turtle, but definitely the reference is changed. So that would be a decoupling. What I will do is the following. I will show that in terms of reference and in terms of sense, we have something like decoupling when we have the evolution of meaning. So for that, I will use case studies of vervet alarm call, human smile, and bad teeth display. The bad teeth display is interesting because it's an evolutionary predecessor of human smile. So when I speak about reference, I speak in a very broad way, similarly as I speak about meaning. So a signal means something. For an eagle alarm call, it would be danger from eagle here and now, or danger from the sky from an eagle here and now. A signal is about something. So for example, the eagle alarm call is about an eagle, which is in that situation here and now. So we only have reference and meaning when we have sufficient reason to think that is necessary for the explanation. Reference of a signal is present when the content is about a particular object or a group or an event. But we only speak about referent if the typical response to the behavior cannot be explained without invoking the referent. Similarly for meaning, we only speak about meaning when the typical response cannot be explained without invoking the meaning. And it cannot be a causal relation, for example. For example, an alarm call, the meaning would be, no, I speak about not only vervet alarm call, but alarm call, it would be danger here and now. And there will be further specification. What I will do now is I will show that an increase in decoupling is actually produce already something look-alike evolution of meaning. So in terms of reference, I will show that an increase of decoupling will be something which can explain why we have continuity, why we have different stages which are more and more decoupled, which are kind of closer to non-natural meaning. Okay, So we have velvet monkey eagle alarm call stand for danger from an approaching eagle. And the response we all know, go to the bushes. Very interestingly, the most dangerous velvet monkey alarm call is the loudest, and the least dangerous velvet monkey alarm call is the softest. Makedoni nyelven many people spoke about it. And it is generally agreed that originally the calls were only effective behavior. So in that case, what we have Q, it's non-referential, it's a causal relation. There is an event and it causes the velvet monkeys to be really afraid, and then they have an affective noise which they make. So we have not yet signal, but later the behavior rendered under some control of the caller. So the signal is decoupled from the affective response and gain control over, and the signaler gain control over the behavior. Okay, and the eagle call later, even in the next stage, became sensitive to the presence and ignorance of the audience. You can see the design. Already there is a bit of design in the second stage, and there is again design in the third stage, which is the being sensitive to the presence or ignorance of the audience. And here we have a signal which is decoupled from the presence of the eagle event. You remember we have a state of affair, and we have a kind of quasi-referential relation. I don't want to discuss whether it's a real referential relation. We just take it that is at least proto-referential or semi-referential. But here we have something which is even better, and that is the snake alarm call, because the snake alarm call triggers velvet receiving it, standing up, looking for the snake, approaching, and in some cases actually mobbing, so attacking the snake. So it seems to be a good evidence that in the snake alarm call, we have something like a deictic proto-reference to a particular snake, which we don't think we have before. We have something like getting closer to referring to a particular object, but not getting yet. Why? So it's very interesting because the snake alarm call is much more decoupled from the snake event, because here it's not only it informs about the event, but it triggers joint action against the snake. So it triggers joint action against preventing a possible dangerous event. So I think that is a much better candidate to think about something like a deictic proto-reference to a particular. And it was already mentioned that infant's eagle call for falling leaves are actually mistakes and they are ignored. So it looks like we have something like the liability already. If it's not reliable, don't listen to it. Actually, there are some literature on that not reliable signalers are not listened to. But when we have that, it means that the signal is learned. That's very, very different from the effective response. So because the learning makes it much more decoupled, it allows more flexibility and allows more expressibility. So the idea is when you get from natural meaning to non-natural meaning, then the expressivity increases. If you remember definitely Chomsky saying that non-natural meaning has infinite, non-natural sign has infinite expressibility. How we get infinite expressibility, we get from stages of decoupling. That's the idea. Obviously, with an alarm call, we don't get so far. We get very, very small things, but I can show that the stages are already quite many in terms of decoupling. So the last case for decoupling for velvet monkey alarm call is green monkeys who live in an island. Green monkeys who live in an island actually give eagle alarm calls to drone. The interesting thing is that they don't have eagle alarm call first. So they kind of invent the eagle alarm call for the drone, and the eagle alarm call sounds exactly like the eagle alarm call of green monkeys living in other places where there is eagle. So it's very interesting because it's both shows that it's hardwired, as Fisher argues, and it shows that we get one more level of decoupling. I call it reference generality. When a communicative act can refer to other similar kind of things like a drone instead of eagle, then what we get an open-ended superset here. So we have something like the meaning is decoupled from the original, the reference is decoupled from the original proto-reference. And think about the meaning. The meaning is relatively inflexible. It's kind of area danger, and it cannot be used for other things. So the meaning is inflexible, but the reference decoupled. Can the meaning be decoupled? Do we have something like idea how the meaning could be decoupled? Yes, I will discuss smile, and I think we will find exactly what we wish for. Could it be that the meaning of a smile changed from fixed to flexible expressivity by being more and more decoupled? So we can think about sense ambiguity, and we can think about referential ambiguity. So referential ambiguity would be that something can mean A or it can be B, where A and B is a particular thing. So for example, a year ring can mean 1345, but if 1345 there wasn't rain, then ring didn't appear, so actually it will mean 1346. So in natural meaning, actually we can find something like referential ambiguity, but we cannot find sense ambiguity. Sense ambiguity is a form of decoupling I introduce when a communicative action in a first social context has one meaning, and in the second social context, it has a different meaning. Social context can be aggression or cooperation, and it's very important that it has to be social context, because sense ambiguity is possible for natural meaning, but not based on social context. So sense ambiguity will be something like that. We have communicative expression. I will use actually language in that point to introduce it. So I say, I am here. I am here can mean I can help you. It can mean I arrived, and it can mean that's my location. A signal, as I said, is holistic. Sometimes, for example, when it's animal communication, then it's most of the time easier to think about holistic signals, but sometimes we cannot even have parts of the signal, so we have to think in a holistic way. Collier and others argued for that. So when I speak about ambiguity, I speak about ambiguity for holistic meaning, and it's very important, and the ambiguity is for the communicative action. So you might say there is three signals, I can help you, I arrive. You can think if you want, doesn't matter. The main thing is we have a surface behavior, the communicative action, and we have three different meanings. So we have two kinds of smile, Duchenne smile and deliberate smile. They are different in different ways. Dynamic morphological profiles look are different. The muscles activated and the control of the muscles are different. But why it's interesting is the following. When we have a spontaneous smile that is not yet a communicative act, and it has one meaning, only affection in affiliation context. Sorry. But when we have a deliberate smile, then we have three different meanings. We have affiliation context, it will mean affection. Context of rivalry, it will mean dominance or end of fight. And the didactic context, it will mean reward. So what we have that very likely the spontaneous smile appears first, because to use the smile for deliberately meaning something means much more control. And the use of and the appearance of smile is 2-3 months roughly. Matt wasn't correct about it. So about 2-3 months, and people are not able to, infants are not able to voluntarily communicate. So what we have is the following. We have spontaneous smile, which is only affective, and we have deliberate smile, which has 3 different meanings. There are reasons to think that first the spontaneous smile developed and the deliberate smile developed later. For example, Demarco and Vijabergi speak about that in Capuchin monkeys, that is the case. They are quite far from us, but anyway, typically there wouldn't be a signal which has 2 different functions. It typically goes like there is a signal with 1 function and the signal acquire 1 more function later. There are not very many studies of development of facial expressions, but it's always the case that first 1 meaning appears and later ambiguity appears in different contexts. So what we have here is 1 communicative act, and we have an increased number of meaning. So the idea is we get decouplement from the original meaning. So originally we have affection, and second we have reward, domination, and affection in different contexts. But you remember, Alamko's, the meaning are relatively fixed, and there is no such things in different social contexts. They will mean different things. They are kind of independent from the social context. So I think that is why it's very important to see that decoupling can be in terms of reference or in terms of sense. And actually, deliberate smile at the end, when used with language, then it has like close to infinite meaning. It can mean insult, it can mean intellectual tension, it can mean boredom, it can mean irony, it can mean a lot of things. But an interesting thing, I think if we find something like meaning ambiguity below human communication, that would say that my idea of decoupling is really something which can help us to understand continuity. And silent bad teeth display in Capuchin monkeys actually already have sense ambiguity. So in Rivali, the silent bad teeth display means submission. In affiliative context, the silent bad teeth display means affection, which is very interesting. And actually, first, in the development of monkeys, first it means affection, and later it can mean both. For adult, it can mean both. For infant, for early infancy, it only means affection. That's very interesting, because it looks like that the decoupling really can model how the evolution of meaning advances. But if I think it's ambiguity, then I have to differentiate it from polysemy and sense generality. So polysemy is applicable to a sign A and B when, if understanding A, if one is understanding A, one will understand B. So for example, one can use Houdini, everyone knows what it refers to. And when someone says the prisoner made a Houdini, everyone will understand what it means, although never heard that phrase before. So the prisoner made Houdini will be understandable for everyone who understands Houdini. So polysemy is a candidate which is, if something is polysemy, then something is not ambiguity. And sense generality, again, is a candidate, a kind of rival for being ambiguous something. So I have to first see the polysemy and sense ambiguity, and after I have to rule them out if I speak about sense ambiguity. So sense generality is something like that. I use C for a subset or a superset of C. Saying in Africa, elephants cannot be tamed is like that, because of course in India they can be. So it's restricted to the African elephants. Both polysemy and sense generality exclude independence of the two meaning. Polysemy requires that we understand the second meaning when we understand the first, and sense generality, sense generality requires a subset superset relation. Okay. Subset set superset relation. So if I rule out that in the case of sense ambiguity, which are offered, the two meanings are independent from each other, then I rule out both polysemy and sense generality. And submission and dominance is such, submission or dominance is such that neither of them require affection. Vice versa, affection doesn't require dominance or submission. Why I use dominance and submission? If you remember that the silent bed display means submission, while smile means dominance in kind of war situation. So that is, I have to have both. So from understanding the affection smile, it doesn't follow that one will understand the rivalry smile, submission, or the glory smile, like I will, domination smile. So is that the case? Yes, it is, because infants first has the affection smile, and they don't understand and don't use the domination or the submission smile. Actually, infants are typically not attacked, so they don't need that, but they don't understand it as well. So what I offer is the following: continuity provided by decoupling. Continuity is such that the communicative act get more and more decoupled from their meaning or sense, and from the presence or existence of the reference in the evolution of meaning. So what I suggest is the following: the evolution of meaning is an increase of expressivity, which is due to increase in decoupling, of course in two dimensions, in decoupling of sense and reference. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Krisztina, for that. And now we move on to Q&A. If there are questions in the room or online. Yep.
Thanks so much, Krisztina. I have two questions for you, or maybe the first is more of a comment about continuity. And that is, I just think it's worth clarifying that continuity is, the way I think of continuity is sort of nice work if you can get it. That is, it's a good ideal to aspire to, but there's nothing in evolutionary theory, either cultural or genetic evolution, that requires continuity. We get a more satisfying explanation of an evolutionary process if we can see it as being continuous in some sense. So the evolutionary story about the development of binocular vision is pretty satisfying, because we've got an account that gives you a relatively smooth gradation from monocular vision to binocular and so forth. But there's nothing in evolution through natural selection, for example, that rules out the possibility of a significantly discontinuous leap because of a striking mutation that ends up being successful. So I debate with this about Dorit. I debate with Dorit Baran about this sometimes. She thinks it's kind of built into evolutionary theory that you can't have discontinuous leaps, but I think that's just a mistake about what evolutionary theory says. And especially if we've got cultural evolution playing a role, you can have some pretty dramatic changes in a short period of time, given that ratchet effect thing that I was talking about during my talk. So I would say I'm for continuity in the sense that it's nice if we can achieve it, but I don't think it's a sine qua non of any evolutionary story about the development of communication.
Could I answer that first? Yeah, so actually I agree very, very much. That's the funny thing. So I had some other things which I had to leave out. And that is the following. If we think about continuity, I think Grice has continuity. So we need something else than continuity. I think what we need is a stage-wise development where there are different stages. And I would think that probably there is no saltation, but bigger jump. I am happy to have them. And if you see here on my slide, yeah, it's always jump. Like sometimes probably there are bigger jump. Very likely counterfactual thinking is quite a big jump, and so on and so on. So I actually agree with it. So my original version, which would be much longer, would have something like I would offer graduality. So not only continuity, but stage-wise gradual development. And what I do with 1, 2, 3, 4, and what I do with the three kinds of smile, like silent, but and so on, like the monkey smile, the spontaneous, and the deliberate smile, they are grades. They are like stage-wise grades. And I don't want to quarrel about which big is the jump, because there is a jump from spontaneous to deliberate smile.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important that whenever we want to understand evolution, we have to understand both the continuity and the non-continuity, which I think is that stage-wise one. So I completely agree. Just I hadn't time to put these parts in. And
Yeah.
I only exclude saltation, and the saltation would be something like language is radically different from any other kind of communication. That's the only which I rule out, but there can be big jumps, I agree.
Okay, good. All right, thanks. And then if we're going to sort of try to play the continuity game as best we can, then I'd point out that if there's a harder challenge for getting around that, for achieving continuity, it's not going to be so much in lexical innovation as it will be in grammatical innovation. So, how do we get something that, a proto-language such as it is, that has something not quite recursion? Does that make any sense? You only have embedding up to 17 levels, but not 18 or something like that. That seems to be very strange as a sort of system to think about. That is to say, I take it that if there's a big challenge here, it's how to find something in between and in some appropriate sense in between the verbish, proto-language that I imagined earlier today, and a natural language such as is dominant now that has recursive and compositional syntax and semantics. It's got no finite upper bound on the number of sentences you can form. That seems like a very big leap, and some people perhaps want to say that it's too big. So I wonder if you have anything to say about that in some ways recursion poses a much more worrying problem than lexical.
So I try to answer those problems with the following. I think that recursion, hierarchical structure, modularity, generality, they are features of the language, which are more like sometimes enabling conditions, sometimes structural features. But I think when we have communication, then I think it might be that communication develop not in a way that exactly those structures change in the continuous manner. So my idea of decouplement is solve the problem that you don't find for hierarchical structures, recursion, modularity, generality, and so on. You don't find really a continuous stepwise movement. But I think you can find for decouplement. And the decoupling is very important because when you want abstract notions, when you want to speak about the future. So, for example, planar Solani only have one way of decoupling, which is like decoupling from here and now. But I think there are different ways of decoupling. And when you have in your environment something like an eagle, and you have a reaction to it. That is when it's like really not decoupled. But when you go away, like small steps, like it need not be eagle, and so on, then I think in these ways you can get small steps. So actually that is the problem which I start to try to solve. But I think the decoupling will be in terms of reference and in terms of sense. And I think, and I agree that the jump can be sometimes quite big. I don't think that's a problem. I think if there is some stepwise development, then the stepwise development is already not like language or not language. And I think we have to see what is the empirical data and what is the case. But I think that decoupling can give a finer gauge stage-wise evolution. But I agree, continuity is actually if we read Grice, he has continuity, because in his natural sign there are many signs, and they are getting closer and closer to non-natural signs. So one way you can read Grice as he has continuity. So that's not enough. Yes.
You could also take the more radical position that says, actually, it's false that natural languages are recursive. That's just a nice idealization that helps us explain some things. But if we're going to play the competence performance game, the distinction from Chomsky, we could say actually no living human being is competent to comprehend a sentence that is a mile long or something.
Yes.
And so one could hold that in fact it's not true that natural languages are recursive. They're always going to have reasonably low final upper bound.
Yeah, so infinite expressivity, I mean something else. I mean potential infinite expressivity. And it's like, for example, when I use Cicero is charging for my turtle, I mustn't even introduce the word Cicero. I have to just look to my turtle and say Cicero is charging, you will understand. In me, the Houdini hasn't anything with the referent of Houdini. So I think that the infinite expressibility is actually potential. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very important that I think like recursion still, yes, Chomsky has that idea, he could be correct, but he might be not correct. So I never would put my vote to something which later can be something like, for example, I would think recursion is one way of modeling, but we have to say that recursion is the only way of modeling. I don't know. I want to make my theory independent from whether someone later say that recursion is not the best way of modeling. Right. And so the hierarchical structure is much better, actually, I think, because I don't think someone will come up and say no hierarchical structure. That I don't think. So I think that it's, and when we think about animal communication and the continuity, then probably we need not think about, or need not only think about the features of the language, because the features of the language, I might think sometimes might be enabling conditions, they might be capacities. And there are some research on that. For example, when they make tools, they're making the tools has a hierarchical structure inside. So probably the hierarchical structure can be just appear somewhere else, not in language, but the hierarchical structure is a really, really deep and good idea. Recursion, I don't know. So the recursion is a capacity, and what makes us able to do recursion, I think, yes, that's okay. So something has to make us able to do recursion, but whether that is, I think, and compositionality, I think is stronger too, but
Good. So just one further question, if I may, and it's about your particular example of I am here, and how that's got different meanings. I mean, a natural response for me, at least in that, to those examples that you gave, is that if we distinguish between content and what the speaker means in saying what they do, we could say the content remains fixed. It's just true if and only if I'm here. But then it's just going to be interpreted in different ways, such as I can help, et cetera, right? You get different interpretations. And I think you were suggesting those different interpretations are going to correspond to different semantic analyses of that same sentence. But my point is just that one doesn't have to go that way. One could just say, no, the sentence's semantics remain fixed, and it just have different pragmatic interpretations depending on the context.
Exactly. So actually, it's 30 minutes, so I cannot do everything. So there is two competing ideas. One is that we have a communicative act, and then we have ambiguity. But the ambiguity actually allows that we have two different signal. So that would be ambiguity.
Mhm.
But one might go to the conversational implicature. So the conversational implicature is actually more expensive because there are a lot of literature on that animals cannot have conversational implicatures.
Sure.
So, but I wouldn't, because I am really open. And I think it's absolutely an open question. Is that sense ambiguity, or we start with conversational implicature? The problem is that it's much more expensive, because with that, I have to go with pragmatic first. I need not go to relevant theory, or something like Sperber-Wilson. But anyway, so it's a very radical take to choose that role, but I think it's a possibility. And if it's that, then it would be a signaling implicature, but that would be even a bigger things. That would be a much, much bigger things. And I think to argue for that is much harder. That would be against Grice-Rebol and many, many people. So there are like really strong statements which say that animals has a conversational implicature. Obviously, they would have something like signaling implicature. And I absolutely agree with you. I have two hypotheses. I have the signaling implicature hypothesis, and I have the sense ambiguity hypothesis, and I am not sure which way to go. I think at the moment, if I think that which is easier to believe on the basis of what we believe is probably the sense ambiguity. If it's signaling implicature, that would be a revision of extremely many things which we think. And that would mean, and that would actually provide a possible gap, because if we wouldn't be pragmatic first in the speech act theory, but I think we would be probably, but anyway, if we wouldn't be pragmatic first in our theory of language, then we would have actually a very big gap. So the signaling implicature needs a lot of argument. But I am actually, so if you would say that which one I would prefer, I actually have very good reasons for the signaling implicature, because I think when communication starts, then it starts with here and now. I have to convey information about things which is around me. And I have something like looking at things and joint looking and such. That looks like, give me something which is very much like a pragmatic realm. So if signaling implicature would be the correct, then probably it has to be argued that language theory has to have a pragmatic first turn too, but it's too much to argue for, I think.
All right, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Great, thanks so much to both. And just a thought about recursion. A couple of weeks ago, we had Marco Spanza give a talk here, and he was talking about proto-arithmetic in a book that's going to proto-arithmetic in a book that's going to come up this year. And so maybe there are different stages to first language acquisition, such that there might be some kind of stand-in that could fake recursion, so to speak, up to a point. Well, anyway, thanks so much. Other thoughts, questions, comments? If not, please join me in thanking Dr. Orbán for a wonderful talk.
Thanks so much.